PP, post-pandemic. So we're able to meet, at least some of us, in person. I wish more of us would come in person. It's nice to have everyone here physically, but we're happy that we could at least meet virtually as a stepping stone to meeting in person. The course is entitled The Basics. The idea is to get to the basics of Judaism, but not kindergarten level, where most people start and many people end there, but to have a little bit more sophisticated understanding of the basics of Judaism. So we're going to cover basics, but hopefully with God's help, it'll be a more mature understanding of the basics. Now the course is going to cover, if we are able to cover everything that I had in mind, first of all, defining Judaism and Jew. That will be today's focus. Overview of Jewish history, but not just going through facts. And this year this happened, that year another thing happened, but to see the unfolding drama of Jewish existence and of the Jewish people. Then Jewish beliefs, the belief systems of Judaism. Then we'll go through some of the life cycle parts of Judaism, from birth till, from the cradle to the grave, the annual cycle, various holidays, and then a general survey of the mitzvot, of the commandments. Not all of them. There are 613, so we obviously cannot cover all 613. And then we'll talk a little bit about anti-Semitism. We can't avoid discussing that because unfortunately it's been a part of Jewish existence for all of our existence. And then within anti-Semitism we can't escape the discussion about the Holocaust. And then of course Israel, the land of Israel. So these are the subjects that we hope to cover with God's help. Today I'd like to focus on defining Judaism. But first we have to define defining. How do you define anything? So there are two ways that people define whatever philosophy, ideology they follow. One is a negative way. People will say, I don't believe in this, I don't believe in that, I don't believe in the third thing, but you don't really say what you do believe in. But unfortunately, that's the way many Jews today define their Judaism. They can't say what their Judaism is to them. They can say what it isn't. I don't believe this, I don't believe that, and sometimes they're right because the things that they negate are actually true. Judaism does not believe in the same things that the other religions believe in, some of the other things that the other religions believe in. But we don't negate all of what other religions believe in, because many of those religions either got it from us, or they happen to have been exposed to a truth, a universal truth that some people could figure out on their own. But to say that by negating, saying I don't believe this and I don't believe that, you really have an understanding of Judaism, that's not true. So we have to define Judaism in a positive way. We have to say what we do believe in, what we do embrace, not what we don't. And that's how Jews have always defined themselves, in an affirmative way. They knew exactly what Judaism meant for them. Even a simple Jew who didn't have a sophisticated knowledge of Judaism, was not advanced, didn't have an education. Nevertheless, if you asked that Jew, him or her, what does Judaism mean to you, they would give you a positive meaning, not a negative meaning. And the flaws in a negative meaning are, you don't know who you are, what you're all about, you know what you're not, but you don't know what you are. And then a very serious breach in defining oneself is that if you try to negate, and that's what many Jews do, they look at the other religions, or the other religion in most Jewish places where Jews live, where the dominant religion is Christianity. So Jews look at Christianity and they say, we don't believe in what they believe in. And since they focus a lot on Messiah, many Jews would say, well, obviously we don't believe in the Messiah. They focus on afterlife. So many Jews will say, well, we don't believe in the afterlife. In fact, I've heard rabbis even say that, as preposterous as it is, because there's no more solid belief that Jews have than in the afterlife. It has always been that way. But many Jews will negate that and negate resurrection of the dead, because resurrection doesn't sound Jewish. I have to admit that's an English word that doesn't sound very Jewish, because it was coined by people who were steeped in Christianity. But the idea of the dead coming back to life is a patently Jewish idea, and it's in the Torah, explicitly in the Torah. There's hardly anything more explicit than that belief. So it's very dangerous to just negate things. We don't believe this and we don't believe that, because then we start to negate things that we do believe in, that actually the other religion got it from Judaism. So let's develop a positive definition of Judaism. In a nutshell, Judaism is a God-oriented, all-encompassing way of life. And how do we know what this all-encompassing way of life is? The Torah is our guide, tells us what that form of life, that way of life is all about. That's the general description of Judaism in a nutshell. If we want to be more specific, Judaism, I have a list of 8 different things, or departments, you could say, of Judaism. Number 1, a system of beliefs. Number 2, a focus on learning. I don't think you'll find another religion, and I'm not an expert in all religions, so I could be proven wrong, but as far as I could see, Judaism is the only religion, the only way of life that puts such a premium on learning, on study, not just for the sake of knowing what to do or what not to do, that's true, but learning for the sake of learning. Even if it will never be relevant in a direct way to your life, you still have a mitzvah, a biblical commandment to learn Torah. Judaism is also a philosophy, a theology, both rational and mystical. Judaism, of course, is a religion of practices, of down-to-earth practices, the mitzvot, the commandments. There are 2 kinds. There are prescriptive, the ones that tell you what to do, and proscriptive, the ones that tell you what you shouldn't do. And Judaism also is about values and character development. Judaism is also puts an emphasis on history, the importance of knowing your history, to know where you came from. Judaism is about community and nationhood. The question is always asked, are we a religion or are we a nation? And the answer is yes. We are a religion and a nation. We're both. There's a big focus on community and nationality that ties in with the land of Israel. And we also have goals and objectives. We're not just doing things because they're important for us to do today, which is, of course, very true, but we're doing things part of a continuum leading to an ultimate goal, and that goal is the Messianic age. So we have objectives in our own lives, and we have national objectives, international objectives, if you will. If you want to define Judaism more broadly and universally, this is how I would put it. Judaism is the master plan for the universe, which when implemented, this master plan, it will lead to an ideal world, a utopian world. That would be a very broad way of defining Judaism.
You haven't mentioned God.
What?
You haven't mentioned that we have a God.
That's included in beliefs. It's a system of beliefs.
Why didn't you say anything about God?
I didn't have to, because that's included in beliefs. But you're right. I'll correct myself if it was an absence unintended that I forgot to mention God. Well, I didn't forget to mention God because I'm talking now just giving an outline of beliefs. The central belief of Judaism, which we'll soon get into, is the belief in God. That's obvious. But that's all part of a system of beliefs. It's not the only belief. It's the most central belief, but it's not the only one. So let's now define what it means to be a Jew. That's the most difficult thing to define. And I have a whole list of 6 questions. Are we a race? You know, in the news lately, there was a whole issue about whether the Holocaust was a racial thing, and a certain TV personality said that it's not racial. And then the backlash was, of course it's racial, because Hitler thought of the Jews as a race, as a subhuman race, and that he had the master race and he had to get rid of our race. But then the counter-argument to that is, but Hitler doesn't define who we are. Do we go to Hitler to define what it means to be a Jew? Jews are not just members of one race. We're members of many races. You could convert to Judaism. So are we a race or are we not a race? It doesn't seem that we're really a race, even though we may be perceived as a race. Are we a religion? Absolutely, we have a religion. That's what makes us who we are. But what about a Jew who doesn't have a religion in terms of what they profess? If a Jew professes not to be a believer in God, for example, or he doesn't or she doesn't believe in practicing the commandments, totally non-observant, are they still Jewish? Would you say, oh, you're not a Jew because you don't believe in God? Well, that's not true. We accept every Jew, no matter what they believe in or don't believe in, no matter how they behave, they're still considered a Jew. You could add an adjective, a good Jew, a better Jew, the best Jew. I don't want to say the negatives. But you can't take away the word Jew. Well, you may qualify the type of Jew, but it's still a Jew. So we're not religion doesn't define who we are. Religion is a very important part of who we are, but it doesn't define what is the word Jew. Are we an ethnicity? Also not. The Yemenite Jews are very, very different culturally and ethnically from German Jews, from Polish Jews, Russian Jews, even different from Iranian Jews or Moroccan Jews. We lump Ashkenazi Jews together and Sephardic Jews together, but they're not monolithic. Sephardic have many different cultures. North Africa is one, and even there are divisions. And then you have the Middle East, you have Yemen, you have Syria, then you have Iraq and Iran, and then you have southern Russia, the stands in Russia. Those are also Jews that are sometimes lumped together as Sephardic, but they're not all the same. It's not the same ethnicity. Are we a nationality? We have a country, just like if you're from Italy, you're an Italian citizen, you're an Italian. If you're a French citizen, you're French. If you're an American citizen, you're American. If you are an Israeli citizen, you are a Jew. No, you don't have to be an Israeli citizen to be a Jew. Most Jews, well, maybe now it's turning in another direction, but till now, most Jews, since the destruction of the first temple, most Jews did not live in Israel. And yet, we certainly wouldn't deny them the title Jew. So we're not a nationality. Are we a language group? Like you have Latinos, are people who speak Spanish or Portuguese. And our language is Hebrew. No, it isn't. Most of our history, Jews as a nation did not speak Hebrew. They spoke Aramaic, they spoke Arabic, they spoke Yiddish, and a half a dozen other Jewish, Judeo, non-Judeo languages. Ladino was another one of those Jewish languages, which is essentially Spanish, a Jewish version of Spanish, intermixed with Hebrew and a few other languages. So we're not a language group either. So after these 5 questions, the 6th question is, then what are we? Because if Jews can't define themselves, we allow the non-Jews, the anti-Semites, to start defining us. And that's not healthy. We have to have a healthy definition ourselves. So would anyone want to venture a definition of what it means to be a Jew? Not who is a Jew. That's a separate issue. How do you determine who is a Jew? That we have to go to halakha, to Jewish law, to determine that. But once it's determined that you are a Jew, what does that mean? The anti-Semites will show you, right? But we can't allow them to define us. We have to be able to define ourselves. The anti-Semites will tell us who is a Jew, because they'll point to this person and say, this is the person we have to hate and discriminate against, but it doesn't tell you what is a Jew. So most Jews could not answer that question. And you know what? I think sometimes even Jews who are well educated in Judaism don't think about that because it's so, what do you mean? I'm a Jew. What is Judaism? What is being a Jew? Practicing Judaism. That's true. That's part of being Jewish. But what defines you as a Jew? That defines you, tells you who is a Jew.
Yeah.
But what is a Jew? Define it.
Is it what or who?
No, they're two different questions. What,
They're the people who were taken out of Egypt by God and became his servants and his children, and we're their ancestors, and we are the Jews.
We are descendants of the Jews who were liberated from Egypt, and who joined us later. That's all true, but that doesn't define what you are. It just defines who you are. That you're a member of this ethnicity, this group of people that goes back 3,000 plus years to the times we were slaves in Egypt.
What Chachma is beyond me? What?
Well, that's you're going to a higher spiritual level. I'm interested in a simple definition that even a child could embrace. And the answer is, a Jew is a member of a group of people chosen by God to deliver and implement the master plan for the universe, which goes back to what we said defining Judaism. Whether or not you like the fact that you were chosen, or you embrace it, that's what being a Jew is. Being a Jew is being part of that group who were given the mission to implement God's master plan, which is Judaism. So it doesn't make a difference. It makes a difference, of course, in terms of your relationship with God and relationship with others, but it doesn't make a difference. You could be the Moses, the greatest Jew that ever lived, and you could be the lowliest Jew, and I'm not going to tell you who that is, because there are a lot of candidates for that. And everyone in between, Moses is no more a Jew than the lowliest Jew. And the lowliest Jew is no less a Jew than the most holy Jew. If you want to talk about how much they observe the things that a Jew is supposed to do, okay, there are vast differences. There's a big gulf between them. But you cannot diminish the status of Jew from any Jew, no matter how far they are from fulfilling their mission. If you are in the army, to use a military analogy, if you're in the army and you have one soldier that risks his life to win the battle, and another soldier goes AWOL, is he still a soldier in the army? Does he still have, until before they discharge him dishonorably. Okay, but in Judaism, there's no dishonorable discharge. That's the only way where the analogy breaks down. But as long as you're still in the army, who are you? What defines you? I am a soldier in the American army, or I'm a soldier in the Israeli army. Whether I'm a good soldier or a bad soldier, whether I deserve to get medals or I deserve to be dishonorably discharged, that will be determined by the way I live in accordance with my mission. But what defines me, I am a soldier. And that's what defines a Jew. A Jew is a soldier in God's army, and there's a mission to change the world and to change it directly by doing all the commandments, and indirectly by influencing and inspiring all of humanity ultimately to be a light to the nations, to make the world a civilized world. And for better or for worse, whether we fulfill our mission and get an A+, or we get a D-, Jews will never fail, but we can get a D-. Sometimes we do very poorly. But even if a D-, we'll still pass, and we'll fulfill our mission collectively. And everyone has to aspire to be the A+, of course. But whether or not we get to the A+, we are members of that group that was chosen at Mount Sinai. And anyone who is born to a Jewish mother, which is what Torah defines who is a Jew, or someone who converts to Judaism in accordance with Jewish law, that person is part of that group, part of that elite spiritual group. Yes, we are the chosen people. We don't have to be embarrassed saying, because chosen means we have the most difficult mission. And we have all the liabilities that are associated with a dangerous mission. And the proof that we are chosen, that's where you can look at the anti-Semites. They know that we're chosen, and that bothers them. So they have to concoct all sorts of theories that we're subhuman, that we're this or we're that, because they realize there's something different about us. And in fact, in so many times throughout Jewish history where Jews try to assimilate and to convert even to another religion, they were rejected. They were spit out. They were not trusted because they said, no, you can't really convert. We want you to convert, and we'll kill you if you don't convert, but you can't really convert because you're still a Jew. The anti-Semites never allowed us to forget that we are chosen. They chose us for ridicule, for persecution, for oppression, but they knew that we are different, that we are chosen. And we can't get rid of that. No matter how we'll try. You know, they tell the story of this Jew with a heavy Yiddish accent comes to the judge and says, I want to change my name. He says, what do you want to change? What is your name now? My name now is Smith. And what do you want to change it to? Johnson. He says, why do you want to change your name to Johnson when your name is Smith? And that's not a Jewish name. He says, yeah, because people will always ask me, what was your name before you changed it? So I want to make sure that my new name and my old name are both non-Jewish names. Jews look for ways to disguise their identities, and the anti-Semite will seek them out. If they don't recognize their own chosenness, we have to rely on the anti-Semite. Yes?
So probably you will talk about this, but Mendelssohn, great
Yes.
Rabbi, of course, his wife was Jewish.
His
son
children
was bankir, and he removed to Christianity. Yes, moved to Christianity. He continued to be Jewish or not?
Yes, even if he converts to we won't honor him for his choice, because he chose to do something to harm his mission, and his membership is like the soldier who goes AWOL.
Yeah. Same composer Mendelssohn. His father was Christian. He is Christian, but he is Jewish.
I don't know about his mother.
Bartoldi, it's Italian Jewish family.
Okay, so he was Jewish.
Christian too.
You know what? There were some Nazis who probably were Jewish by Jewish law, and yet they were the most evil of people. Jews sometimes could become evil. Who was it in the Soviet Union who was...
You say Trotsky.
Trotsky, but even later, who was one of the biggest murderers. I forgot his name. Kaganovich.
No.
No? Okay, I take... You're the expert on Russian murderers. What?
So to be in government of Soviet Union, it's not mean you are killer. He was great builder, but because he was only one in government Soviet Union, now every anti-Semite say it's Kaganovich killed people now.
Okay, well, we'll debate that some other time. You know more than me about
Rabbi,
that subject.
Can you talk a little bit about where in the Torah it talks about the chosen, the Jews were the chosen people?
Okay, it's in the book of Exodus. It's in the book of Deuteronomy, where it says that when God gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai, it says you are chosen from all the nations of the world.
Is there a lot of discussion about what is chosen in the Talmud, or?
The Talmud doesn't talk that much about it. No, it was a accepted thing that at Mount Sinai God said, you know, we have a lot of nations. They all have responsibilities. They all have a mission. but I'm choosing you from all the nations of the world that you should be special, that you should be different and on a higher level, more ethical, more moral, more observant, more godly, not chosen to have privileges, because we as a nation have had fewer privileges than any other nation on earth. Except there's nothing wrong with us having privileges. Thank God that in the modern times, Jews are more prosperous than they ever were, and we have more privileges because we're living in a more enlightened age to some extent. In some other extents, less enlightened. But that's a separate subject. So now that we defined what Judaism is and what it means to be a Jew, so let's talk a little bit about, and this is just touching on it, we're going to go more in depth as we go on, the system of beliefs. There's a myth that Judaism does not focus on faith. Faith is something Christian. That's another one of the myths that people use to negate what defining Judaism through not what it is, but what it isn't. That we're not a religion of faith. We focus on action. There's a kernel of truth in that. Yes, we do focus on action, but not at the expense of faith. And as I always like to use the analogy, that faith is like a foundation of a building, of a structure. Action is the structure itself. You can't have a structure without a foundation. What will happen if you build a building without a foundation? It'll eventually collapse. But you can't just have a foundation without a building. There's no point in that. Judaism says faith is ultimately the foundation of Judaism. Faith in God, faith in the Torah, faith in the coming of Mashiach, and I'm only listing 3, but there's 13 principles of faith which are listed in the next page, and we'll get into it when we deal with faith itself. I'm just trying to give you a little survey of what Judaism is about, and Judaism is certainly about faith. And there are 13 principles of faith, but those are not the only things that we believe in, that we're supposed to believe in. We're supposed to believe in free choice. We're supposed to believe in the immortality of the Jewish people, that we will live forever. No other nation has that guarantee. We believe in angels, and we believe in everything the Torah tells us. If the Torah tells us that Noah built an ark to save the humanity, yes, we believe that as we do every other detail of the Torah. And that's the foundation of Judaism. The commandments are the structure. Learning. Judaism has put such a premium on learning Torah in particular. And what does learning involve? What do we have to learn in Judaism? If you ask many Jews, what is there to learn about Judaism? They don't know very much. I remember painfully a story that happened close to 50 years ago. When I first came to Buffalo and I was on UB, there were Jews who were getting into different cults. So there was one young Jew who got into this cult, Maharaji. Guru Maharaji, I think he was. Not Maharishi, but Maharaji. He was a 14-year-old kid who proclaimed himself to be a god or something like that. And this Jewish boy got involved, and he had a roommate who was also Jewish, who tried to get him out, so he enlisted our help, Chabad's help. And I was once walking, I remember in the Norton Union, walking with the roommate and saying to him that it's such a shame that he's looking for spirituality in another religion when we have it in Judaism. We have everything in Judaism. And what he said shocked me, and he said to me, there's nothing in Judaism. This kid had a Hebrew school education, and what he was exposed to was the nothing of Judaism, because he was given a kindergarten, nursery school level of Jewish knowledge, not knowing that there's such a vast repository of knowledge. I always like to brag about my computer hard drive. I have a little hard drive, it's the size of a cell phone, that has 150,000 Jewish books. 150,000. Every year they add another 5,000 to 10,000 books. I'm only up to 130,000. So it's impossible. It's such it's an ocean of knowledge. in the olden days, if you were very wealthy and you had the ability to buy Jewish books, the most you can probably have in your library was 5,000 books. There was a rabbi who was a rabbi in Lublin in the 19th century who had a phenomenal memory, and it was said that he memorized 5,000 volumes. But that was the extent. You couldn't have more than that. It wasn't available. And now we have that availability. But anyhow, what does Jewish learning involve? It involves the Bible, the Tanakh. The Tanakh itself is divided into 3 parts: the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and the holy writings like Psalms, the book of Esther, and so on, Job, and Proverbs. Then you have biblical commentaries. Rashi is the most famous of them, but he's only one of thousands of biblical commentaries. The Talmud is the greatest work of Judaism, and the Talmud, with its commentaries and the codes of law that were written to codify the teachings of the Talmud, such as Maimonides' work and the Code of Jewish Law, you could spend 100 lifetimes mastering this. There are people today who have a custom of studying 1 page of Talmud a day. 1 page means a leaf, 2 sides of the page. In the course of 7.5 years, they complete the whole Talmud. And there are websites where you could listen in to these teachings, and you could be, it's not always easy. Sometimes the learning is hard. It takes about 45 minutes to go through a page. It's very quick, but they're probably, when they did the conclusion of the study of the Talmud a few years ago, they used this 2 stadiums. I think 150,000 people were participated in the conclusion of the study of Talmud. But that's a very superficial level of learning. There's so many levels of learning. Midrashic literature, the non-legal interpretations of the Torah that were written by the Talmudic sages. Then you have the philosophical literature, such as the Guide for the Perplexed, the writings of Maimonides, and just one of many hundreds of writings of Jewish philosophy, rational philosophy. Then you have the moral and ethical literature known as Musar, the literature that focuses on the character development and refinement. And then you have the mystical literature, the Kabbalah, the Hasidic teachings. Then there's Jewish history, which is part of Jewish learning. And then you have works that focus on Hebrew grammar, the grammar of the Torah, and the Hebrew language, the biblical Hebrew language. So these are how many? 14 different areas of Jewish knowledge that encompass hundreds of thousands of books. So it doesn't say you have to learn everything. It's impossible. But you have to start somewhere. It says in Ethics of the Fathers, your job is not to finish everything. But you can't say that I'm not going to even start. We have to all start, and the little bit we could learn is very valuable. Then Judaism is a philosophy, a theology, and a mystical one. And part of that philosophy deals with proof of God's existence, the idea of monotheism, what monotheism means, reasons for the divine commandments. Maimonides puts a lot of emphasis in his Guide for the Perplexed, giving reasons, discussing the idea of the chosen people, which we referred to before. What is exile and redemption all about? Judaism versus other religions and isms. Judaism talks about the spiritual worlds, about prophecy, the soul, reincarnation, resurrection. These are all topics that relate to Jewish theology and philosophy. Then, of course, Judaism is about Jewish practices, the mitzvot, the commandments. There are 613 biblical commandments, and there are many rabbinical commandments, and we'll talk about them as we go on. And then we also have Jewish customs, which are very important. Although a custom is something that's developed by the people, not by the Torah. The Torah doesn't tell you to follow this custom, but Judaism believes that customs have value and they should not be minimized. Then we have values and character development in Judaism. I went through a list of A through Z. I'm sure there's more that I left out. Faith and trust in God. Love of God, Israel, and Torah. Those are the 3 loves. Reverence and respect for God, respect for parents, teachers, elders, respect for life, etc. I don't know what etc. is, but I'm sure there are other things. Justice, truth, peace, compassion, kindness, humility, holiness, activism, dedication, tenacity, inner strength, vitality and enthusiasm, responsiveness, whatever that means. Holy chutzpah, mind over matter, contentment, continued growth, introspection and desire to change, multifaceted, balanced, consistency, joy, and self-sacrifice. These are some of the values of Judaism, and I'm rushing through this list because we're going to try to talk more about them in detail as we go on. And then Judaism has a history. And I divide history into 3 stages, from creation until Sinai. That was the preparatory stage where we were preparing for getting the master plan. Before you can induct someone into the special forces of the military, before you become a SEAL or a Marine or a Green Beret, whatever the names of the different special forces are, you have to have basic training and get the world ready for it. And that was what happened from creation until Sinai. At Sinai, we got the Torah, we got the master plan, and we had to implement it. And we did implement it. We cut into the land of Israel. We built the temple. The temple was destroyed, and we built the second temple. And when the second temple was destroyed, that means we didn't exactly fulfill our mission. And now we had to go into exile and to learn the hard way what it is to be a Jew and how to implement God's purpose. So from the destruction of the second temple, which was the beginning of the diaspora, until the coming of Mashiach, when we have to implement the master plan within the conditions of exile, that's the last leg of this historical journey, which will conclude with the coming of Mashiach, which will lead us into a 4th era, but a completely different kind of positive existence. Judaism is about community and nationhood. We'll talk about the community versus the individual, because we have this big debate. Do you focus on the community, on the collective? Do you focus on the individual? And the role of Israel and the diaspora. There's a lot of contention there. There's a lot of conflict about what is the role of Jews who live in the diaspora versus the Jews who live in Israel. And then there's anti-Semitism that affects our community and our nationhood. And then we have to talk about goals and objectives. There are short-term goals that we all have, and the Jewish people as a nation has short-term goals, and we have the individual goals, communal goals. Every community has its purpose and its goals. And then we have the universal goals, which is the Messianic age. So this, in a nutshell, defines what Judaism is about, and the rest, you have to come for the next 5 classes. Actually, 500 classes would be better, but every one of these chapters is a book ready to be written and have been written. So if anyone has any questions here or on Zoom, please feel free. Oh, someone asked me to repeat the question. I don't remember which question it was. Yes?
Does Chabad believe in Musar?
Musar is part of Torah. Musar is the part of Torah that the question was, does Chabad believe in Musar? Musar are the ethical teachings. The ethical teachings are part of Judaism in the Torah. The word Musar comes from the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Proverbs. Musar simply means discipline, reproof, reprimanding. That a father is obligated to rebuke his child if the child starts doing things that are improper. So the Musar focus is on telling you what you do that is wrong. And Hasidic teachings focus on the positive, but Hasidic teachings incorporate Musar and they go beyond it. So Musar is part of Judaism. Now there are different developments of Musar. You have biblical Musar. The whole book of Proverbs is Musar, is the King Solomon rebuking people for doing things that are off the path, that are contrary to wisdom and so on, and praising people when they do the right thing. The Talmud is full of Musar, and then there were books written subsequent to the Talmud. For example, Rabbeinu Yonah, one of the 14th century sages, wrote a whole book called The Gates of Repentance. That's Musar. Then more recently, when I say more recently, 250 years ago was the Ramchal, Reb Moshe Chaim Lutzato, who wrote a book called Mesilas Yesharim. That's a book of Musar. But the only criticism we have to Musar in Hasidic circles is that it focuses too much on threatening people's future, saying if you do this, you're going to burn in hell. And even though we don't disagree that there is such a concept of heaven and hell in Judaism, which is a separate subject, we don't focus on that too much. We focus on the positive. That's one of the differences between Musar and Chassidus. But Chassidus certainly incorporates some of Musar. Yes?
How, I mean, this is a huge amount of stuff that you just talked about. And how did it, like, become lost to what the common people and become something that just scholars study?
Well, it's not really only scholars. It's the average layperson throughout Jewish history knew some of these things by osmosis, without even learning. They knew these things. And even the average layperson, it's only in modern times that there's this vast gulf between the level of scholarship of American and Western Jews in secular areas and the dearth of knowledge in Jewish areas. You know, we have the widest gulf. You know, you have so many Jews who are PhDs or, you know, certainly college graduates, so they're very sophisticated in secular areas of knowledge, although I think that's going downhill now as well. And then, when it comes to Jewish knowledge, most of them are kindergarten and nursery school level, because the Hebrew schools don't really give you real education. And there are exceptions to every rule, but the rule is unfortunately that way. So it's the last 200 years where Jews have become secularized that they stopped learning Judaism, and that's gradually changing for the better as well. You see, there are two trends. There's a trend away from learning because they're victims of 2 centuries of benign neglect, and then there's the return to Judaism that we're experiencing, return to learning Torah in all segments of Judaism. You had a question?
I was curious about it's kind of like a mystical question, but it's about the creation of the Jewish soul. Like, is there a work that I could study or learn that how the creation of the Jewish soul is different than the non-Jewish soul?
Well, there's a lot of that in Hasidic thought, in Kabbalah and Hasidic thought, but it's not in one place. There's no one book that goes into that. It's scattered throughout the literature. So you could learn Tanya, and you have it in the beginning of this book called the Tanya. The question was, by the way, for those who are listening on the Zoom, about literature that discussed the differences between the Jewish soul and the non-Jewish soul, and that you can find a lot of that in Hasidic philosophy, and scattered throughout different writings. And the Tanya is one of them, the first and second chapters. Any other questions? Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break. There's some food here for those who are here in person. And 11 o'clock, God willing, we'll start the second class on the pursuit of truth.